Okay, I'd like to call the 7 p.m. ordinance establishing revised standards for ground motor solar energy systems to order, that public hearing. Roll call, Ms. LeBreau?
Present.
Ms. Cantor?
Here.
Ms. Casperson?
Here.
Mr. Davidoff?
Here.
Mr. Dodge?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan? Mr. Winograd? Here. And Mr. Williams?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Presentation?
Good evening. Before you tonight, you have an amendment to the existing standards for ground-mounted solar energy systems. As you'll recall, some months ago, the council adopted an ordinance permitting alternative energy equipment either as accessory or main uses in certain zones. Shortly after the adoption of that ordinance, we had someone who I would say took advantage to the fullest of what the ordinance allowed by way of ground-mounted solar, and created some consternation amongst his neighbors and other people in the community. The council adopted a moratorium on the installation of additional ground-mounted solar equipment, and asked us to look at additional restrictions which might be imposed to prevent a repeat of that unfortunate situation. What you have before you is the response to that, and it consists of a couple of different additions. The first is actually a definition of what constitutes a ground-mounted solar energy system, and really there are two kinds. One is sort of the general rule, and there's the sort of general rule and then the exception to the general rule. The general rule is what you would normally think of as a almost tripod-like arrangement on the ground with fixed panels mounted at an angle generally pointed to the south, and an array of those sitting on the ground. The second type of solar panel array is often called a pole mount or a solar tracker mount, or there are different brand names for them. But it's a panel that is mounted on a pole, and the panel usually is designed so that it can tilt and rotate to track the sun. Those are what the gentleman who created the concern mounted, installed in his yard. And one of the comments, while they're more efficient, one of the comments that we got from people was that they are far more industrial in appearance. The pole itself, because of wind loading and other things, looks like the base of a cell tower. It's mounted in concrete. It's not quite that big, but it's very industrial looking and out of character with just about any residential neighborhood. So we thought it was important to distinguish between the two types of ground mounts. The next thing we did was the existing ordinance allowed ground mounts to be all kinds of ground mounts to be both in the side and rear yards. In retrospect, we felt that it was better or more appropriate that they be limited to rear yards only. If you look at subsection 177-37.3 Kappa 1B, that's for the benefit of the record. I know you all know where it is. We've deleted the language that permitted them in side and rear yards and said they shall be treated as accessory buildings which must comply with the requirements of section 177-20E. That provision is the general provision that applies to accessory structures and says they can only be in rear yards, and then it establishes side and rear yard setbacks from lot lines for them. So those get incorporated by reference. And it also refers to the third change we made to the ordinance, which is on the next page. Excuse me, it's not on the next page. Yes, the reference to subsection C3B2 is actually 2 pages forward, but, no, I take it back, it's all in one section. My bad. So the third change we added was, we divided ground mounts into those 2 classes, pole mounts and all other. We said they must be no higher than 10 feet in height. Accessory structures in residential zones, i.e. your garage, can be 15 feet. We felt that one of the problems that we heard about this particular situation was that they loom, they appear massive. So we brought it down from 15 feet to 10. And we also limited the lot area that they can cover to 10%. Accessory structures, your garage, can be up to 25%. And if you think about it, in the smaller zones, a single-car garage can easily take up 25% of a backyard. So that's why it's allowed to be that big. But we didn't feel it was appropriate to have 25% of somebody's yard taken up by solar panels. Which brings us to the last piece on that carryover, the carryover on that paragraph, which is, where are they allowed? When we first wrote this ordinance, we received encouragement from at least one member of the council not to limit them to the big zones. They wanted them available. Somebody commented that they felt they should be available to anybody. So we were trying to create an ordinance that allowed even R6 multifamily zones to have some access to solar panels. And in retrospect, when it comes to ground mounts, that was a mistake. In the smaller zones where houses are closer together, the density of zoning that we have, having even 10% of your yard covered by ground-mounted solar is intrusive and objectionable to the neighborhood. So in multifamily zones, the R6, R10, and R13 zones, ground mounts are prohibited altogether. Doesn't mean you can't have one on your roof. You can't have one in your yard. In the R20 zone, they're permitted in the rear yard only, but they're only the true ground mounts are. Pole mounts are not permitted. Again, it's that more industrial, bulkier, bigger situation. In the R40 and R80 zones, which are our 2 largest zones, the ground mounts and pole mounts are permitted, again, only in the rear yard, and they are also permitted in all commercial and industrial zones. So that combination of additional restrictions we think is adequate to address the concerns. Will there be people who build things that their neighbors object to even under these standards? Possibly, but we think that it's an appropriate balance of the rights of the property owners. The only other thing in the ordinance that I should note, just for the record, is because the moratorium was adopted as part of this ordinance, now that that's over, we need to take out that last subsection that included the moratorium. So the very last paragraph, subsection E, strikes the moratorium language. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Somebody with an unusual lot could theoretically, the town manager pointed this out, could ask for a variance, explaining that they have some type of hardship. The hardship standard in Connecticut is extremely high. It's very hard to get. Arguing hardship, I'm not quite sure how you would do that. I suppose somebody who had a pie-shaped lot in the rear yard might have a situation where they couldn't meet the 10% even with a small panel. I don't know, but they certainly have that option. The other issue the town planner mentioned to me that somebody had asked this question, it's not changed in this ordinance, but to make it clear, that the existing ordinance already allowed for this. In residential zones, we do permit certain institutional types of uses, schools, churches, synagogues, that sort of thing. Those are always approved by the Plan and Zoning Commission pursuant to a special use permit. The ordinance allows the special use permit to be amended to allow for additional solar panels and not to comply with the height and setback requirements, but to be approved as part of that plan. For example, Conard has an outbuilding where they have a wind generator and that sort of turbine, and they have solar panels. That sort of thing can be approved by the TP&Z, part of the special use permit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lara. That was very helpful. Any questions from the council? Okay, then we will go to the sign-up sheet. Thank you. First person on the sign-up sheet is Bernard Pelletier. Please state your name and address for the record. 3 minutes to speak. Press the button.
Press the voice activated? Yes, indeed. Good evening. My name is Bernie Pelletier. I live at 21 Northcliffe Drive. I am a resident of West Hartford. I'm a partner in a project called 100% Connecticut. Mr. Michael said because I represent a group, I have 5 minutes. I may not need them, but I do appreciate the West Hartford Clean Energy Task Force and the 100% Connecticut project on promoting widespread adoption of solar, residential, commercial, municipal buildings, including schools. I just want to hand out 5 exhibits. If you just pass them and look at them, they're not going to tax anybody's brain. I just want to give you a visual of what it is I'm talking about. 3 of the pictures are simply web pictures of solar canopies over parking lots. I merely want to give you a visual, which I think might be sort of a tweener, as you laid out roof mounts and pole mounts and tripod mounts. You can boil all of my remarks down to how do we think about solar canopies over parking lots. That's essentially my area of concern. And the 4th and 5th exhibit would be an example draft proposal of something we could do at Conard High School. So I drafted up solar over there, 2 parking lots, and the very last page would show you that the energy that could come off of a setup like that would be equivalent to about the energy from 240 typical residential installs. Substantial. So, in a nutshell tonight, my comments here are I'm really seeking clarification that it is not the intent of this change in the regulation to prohibit or to make it difficult to site these sorts of systems. I'm emboldened by the fact that I am familiar with the installation, and I totally agree with that it's inappropriate. And but these would be the things that I'm proposing. The solar canopies would be substantial edifices. There is one down here in front of the bank, right on Farmington Avenue, if you wanted to get a tangible visual. But I'm hoping you would say this is not something that would fit in a residential neighborhood. These would be in commercial segments and therefore permissible. My second area of concern is, I know you're concerned with residential aesthetics and neighborhood feel. And in a residential area, I'm concerned myself. All the churches, high schools, schools, everything abuts to residences here in West Hartford. So I want to make sure that we're comfortable with the fact that these things are. The height requirements may not make sense in this regard because the height requirements in a solar canopy over a parking lot is driven by what you want to drive underneath it. So if you're driving a bus or a truck or something like that, you want it to be high enough so vehicles can get under it. understand where these regulations as written are, but I think they may be confusing if you try to apply them to a solar canopy. And I guess my fifth comment is that there is a requirement that I read near the end of it for a 6-foot fence around the solar installations. Obviously, it wouldn't make sense to have a 6-foot fence around the parking lot because it would be difficult to use it the way it was meant to be used. My very last comment is I'd like to make this body aware of the existence of the West Hartford Clean Energy Task Force, offer its counsel and assistance when this body comes across things like this. We could help proof, create, draft, this sort of thing before it gets to this point. I guess we found out sort of somewhat late in the game, and we have some wonderful people. Dave Mello, who's in the office, used to, in the audience, I want to say, worked for the Department of Energy. He's literally, you don't get to say this too often, a rocket scientist. I'm a mere mortal, but he's a rocket scientist. So we have people like that on the committee that could be very helpful to what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Mr. Peltier. Mr. Mello, you signed up. Do you want to speak, or is that? No? Okay, thank you. And then Arnold Chase.
Good evening. For the record, Arnold Chase, 3115 Albany Avenue in town. By way of background, I've been involved with the solar electric generation for literally 50 years, starting in 1966, when as part of an after-school science club, I actually built my first solar cell. For the last 17 years, I've been a director of one of the state's electric companies, but everything I say tonight represents just my personal views as a West Hartford resident and not as a corporate director. I want to applaud the town for being progressive in originally approving a lot of the solar systems that you have done, and I appreciate the situation you're in now. I asked, and I don't believe the town hired a specialized engineer to guide you in the drafting of this proposed ordinance, and I want to take this opportunity to point out to you areas of this proposed ordinance that don't make sense, are contradictory between sections, or can be easily and legally circumvented within a day. And I'm sure none of us want to get back here with another hearing to make corrections, so we really need to get this right before it's approved. And even the term solar energy system is not a usual term of art. And if you look at what you're saying in the ordinance, which is really the corrections in terms of pole mount that you're trying to do, what does geothermal systems, fuel cells, things like that have to do with your problem, which is photovoltaic or solar energy, solar electric cells. So you got me saying that now. In terms of, I know I have just another 2 minutes, so just quickly going through there. I've handed out some pictures. I have comments for it, but I don't have enough time to explain everything in the pictures. So if you have questions, we can go into more detail. But as an example, subsection D, paragraph 1C, states that the solar energy system or fuel cell shall be completely enclosed by a minimum 6-foot-high fence. Yet in subsection C, paragraph 3B2, the ordinance states, where permitted, the ground-mounted solar energy systems shall not exceed 10 feet in height. Now, solar panels lose a substantial amount of their output if there is any shading or shadowing on the panel. So on one hand, you're forcing the mounting of typically, let's say, a 6-foot-long panel within a few feet off the ground, yet at the same time, you're also requiring a 6-foot-high minimum fence to surround it, which will shade the panels, requiring more panels to be installed to make up for the lost energy, et cetera. And, having installed these panels, you have to appreciate, due to snow drifts, nearby objects that cast shadows, et cetera, it's not practical to have a panel mounted any less than 2 or 3 feet above the ground. So, you do the math, and it's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And because of the proposed 10-foot height limitation, this precludes the stacking of panels. And where you really want to stack panels is to minimize the amount of lot coverage. And now you can't do that. At 15 feet, you could do it. You can't do it now. Just as there are different, as you look at your building standards, different building heights allowed between the various zones. For instance, I think R20 zone allows a main building height of 20 feet, I believe, and then the, look at the side here. In any event, the R80 zone, the height of the building, and here it is, the maximum height, is 35 feet. In the R40 zone, it's 30 feet, and also 30 feet in the R20 zone. So by having all your various zones, it doesn't really make sense to cap things for the smallest lot, or to correct the problem you have, and then preclude the R40 and, most importantly, the R80 zones from where you'd really see these mounted from practically being built. Also, in terms of your definitions such as underground, your closed loop definition, does that also mean underwater? Because such as in the various ponds we have around town, because that's the most efficient setup if you do a geothermal. And how these ordinances are, as I said, how they're associated and lumped together, it just doesn't make sense, because a pole mount photovoltaic mount has nothing to do with a fuel cell. So, it's tying these all together. Now, you also state in subsection D, paragraph 2D, that in the event of a building with solar tiles, if they're not used for 6 months, they need to be ripped out. Yet you look at the first two pictures, what looks like normal roof tiles are in reality solar panels. So what are you trying to gain by forcing someone to rip out those solar panels if they don't want to use it for whatever reason, if the electric tariffs change, et cetera? Now, in terms of pole mount, and do I have another minute? Okay. In terms of getting around the pole mount, you see picture 3, you have, and picture 4, you have trailer-mounted solar panels. Your definition, as proposed, calls for direct ground mount. I think I'm quoting there. So you can roll a trailer right in. The same fellow that you have a problem with can roll a trailer in, and it's not ground mount anymore. The last picture you see is also not a direct ground mount. You can just pick it up and plop it down. There's no connection to the ground. It's just weighted in ballast. And again, if the person was as creative to have a hydraulic pole as he was, this is what you're going to be up against. So I'll use up my time. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chase. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to come and speak to this subject, this public hearing? No? Okay. That's the end of the public comment. We are going, would you like to answer or respond to anything, or should we?
I'm happy to
Anybody?
try, or if you
And
council
anybody
has
have any
any
questions?
questions. Do you want, sometimes you wait and do this during debate, but I defer to you.
Right. Well, we have a read in the record, letter dated October 14th, 2016 from TPZ recommending approval, and letter dated November 8th, 2016 from CROG finding no apparent conflict. So I would, if. go ahead, why
Maybe
don't
I
you
should
start?
just take a minute so that it's on the record of the public hearing rather than just in the debate. I took a couple of notes, and a couple of points were hit by both speakers. First of all, the ordinance does nothing to prohibit solar canopies. Let's not worry about that one. The bank in West Hartford Center, it's in a commercial zone, so it's certainly permitted in a commercial zone. in a residential zone, at a school, Conard, something like that, a solar canopy, if it's sheltering the cars parked underneath it, it's going to be treated as the solar portion as being roof mounted on the structure that's sheltering the cars. So it wouldn't even be treated as a ground mount. In the normal course. I'm not going to say that there's no scenario under which it might not be, but in the normal course, it would be treated as a roof mount, and it would be subject to the height limitation for accessory structures. Which brings me to the comment that Mr. Chase made about the maximum height fluctuates in the zone. Well, it does for main buildings, but in all residential zones, the accessory height is uniformly 15 feet for accessory structures throughout all of our residential zones. So that wouldn't really apply to this situation. I couldn't quite figure out why there seemed to be confusion, and then it dawned on me. Some of the other comments that were made refer to subsection D, which, because of the way the page breaks on the ordinance, the heading is at the bottom of the page and then the text carries over. The comment about the 6-foot-high fence and the comment about removal after 6 months only apply to permitted main uses. They don't apply to solar panels that are on your roof of your house or ground mounts in your yard that are accessory to your home. They apply to commercial permitted main uses where somebody plops a solar field down, which is what actually generated or triggered this ordinance, no pun intended, which triggered this ordinance in the first place. Somebody came to us and said, we want to put a solar field on an old brownfield site. Never ended up happening. But the idea was they were going to have a solar field, and in that context, we said, okay, you need to have a fence around it, just like we'd want you to have a fence around anything that's generating electricity, and remove a radio tower if you stop broadcasting with it. And so that only the idea that somebody could do this mount, and we do need to adopt it because of the deadline on the moratorium.
Okay, Mr. Barnes, did you have a question?
Thank you. Two quick questions. One on the fifth picture of the set from Mr. Chase, which has has an array. It looks like it's on some black tubing. Could you just comment on whether this would be permitted under this ordinance?
Without taking height measurements or that sort of thing, it appears to be less than 10 feet in height, so it wouldn't be a problem. I don't know where it's located on the lot or how big it is relative to the yard, so I can't tell whether it exceeds the 10% limitation. But I would say that is definitely a ground-mounted device. The fact that it's mounted on top of plastic tubes as the support doesn't make it any less ground-mounted. That's the way it's affixed to the ground. The definition of structure in our zoning ordinances refers to anything on the ground.
Okay.
And so I would call that a ground mount.
Okay. And then just one other question. We have this revision. We had the moratorium because we had the issue over, I think, by Norfelt School on that property. And could you just briefly explain how the changes that we've made here address that situation, and so that won't happen again?
Sure.
Thanks.
First of all, the gentleman in question, I believe there were some minor, or some aspects of his installation which didn't comply with the ordinance as it was adopted. He has apparently, as I understand it, made it compliant. So he is grandfathered. That situation, that particular situation, is not affected by these changes at all. The height limitation, his installation is taller than would be permitted under this. The percentage of coverage is greater than would be permitted under this. And I'm not sure if the side or the setbacks would be also limited. But the short answer is, he'd have to make a substantially smaller design
Okay.
to meet the requirements of this ordinance.
Okay, so it's height and area.
It's
We're talking-
height and area are
Okay.
the big changes.
Lowering the
And-
height, shrinking the area that
I-
it could cover.
I actually should say the other thing I don't recall is I don't remember what zone he was in. Those are pole mounted, the antennas on there. If he's in anything under an R20 zone, and he may be in an R13, they wouldn't be allowed at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mrs. Kerrigan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Seeing as we're so fortunate to have local experts, Mr. Chase and Mr. Pelletier, as well as their fellow rocket scientists, I mean, how lucky are we that they not only know this, but they also are vested in our community? Is it possible to delay a decision so that we can take advantage of what they bring to the conversation here and still do whatever needs to happen? Like, what's the time crunch here?
Well, the time crunch is that the moratorium that the council adopted expired on October 31st. And until this is adopted, somebody could come in and submit an application under the old version of the ordinance, and we'd have to approve it. So the concerns that I heard raised tonight have very little to do with the specific changes that are proposed. They may have further concerns about other aspects of the ordinance, but they're not actually being addressed tonight. So I would encourage you to adopt this to deal with the situation that was the concern that prompted the moratorium. And if there are reasons to look at the ordinance and consider other changes to it, I tend to think that there aren't, but you could do that separately.
Okay. Are you all set?
So the decision deadline is...
Passed.
Is passed? Okay, and so we would be exposing ourselves to somebody... Okay. Which
We don't want to.
may be remote, that someone's going to come forward in that period of time, so,
Perhaps.
okay.
Mrs. Hall?
Could you just clarify for me again, if you have a school, it's in a residential area, could they put one of these pole-mounted ugly
Yes.
edifices?
Yes. The short answer is they could with a special use permit from the TP&Z.
And so the special use permit from the TP&Z, would they have the ability to deny it on the basis of it's ugly and it's near residences?
Essentially, yes. There are certain findings that they are required to make under the ordinance. The word ugly doesn't appear in there. Not in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood does.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that that is a strong enough to make sure that, I mean, I have seen this, and it's not attractive at all. And I would be very, very upset if that was next to my house, and whether it was next to my house, you know, on a school property or in somebody else, I would be just as, you know, upset. So I just want to make sure that this is strong enough to prevent that from affecting
Sure.
somebody's property value.
The most likely scenario is that you would have something like this proposed at a school, although it could be a church or other type of use. Obviously, our schools, we work with our schools department, and we're as sensitive as we can be to the neighborhood. Sometimes when something like this is proposed, it's proposed less to generate energy than to provide an educational opportunity. That's what the facility at Conard was originally designed to do. It doesn't produce much energy, but it's a lab, in essence, for the students. And in that context, people tend to understand it and accept it. If we showed up and said, we're going to put, 20 solar trackers along the property line, first of all, I don't think the town manager would ever let us do it, but second of all, I don't think the TP&Z would let us do it. churches, somebody else who isn't us, who might propose it, I think that there's enough there that the TP&Z can say, no, this is too imposing on your neighborhood. After all, that's why the council took this back to look at it again, is the sensitivity over that issue, and they'd have that pretty squarely in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Mr. David?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Attorney Allaire, I just want to make some clarification here. So the ordinance that we adopted in October 2014 basically addressed ground-mounted solar energy type projects. That was our concern. The community was, the legislative body here was very comfortable and encouraging of roof-mounted solar panels. So the next evolution of how solar energy could be captured would be things that would be placed in people's yards. So we didn't have anything on our zoning regulations to address any types of structures that could be constructed. So that's basically why that ordinance came forward, correct?
A little variation on that, and it also gets to something that Mr. Chase raised. The initial question that came to us was about a commercial solar array. And we didn't have anything on the books that allowed it. We had allowed people to put solar panels on their roofs. They've been doing that since the 80s, to heat their swimming pool. They'd have a water collector. But we treated that as an accessory use. Ground mounted, there really wasn't anything. When we started looking at an ordinance, it dawned on me, us, the staff, that we were looking at solar. We already had an ordinance on the books about prohibiting outdoor wood burning furnaces. So we had solar, we had wood burning furnaces, we had a number of people coming to us with applications for geothermal. And although most of a geothermal system is underground, portions of it can be above ground. And we're also seeing the advent of alternative energy systems like, fuel cells, but I'm thinking microcells, that sort of technology, and we saw that coming down the pike. So we decided to try to hit them all with an alternative energy systems ordinance that treated all of those as accessory uses and as main uses. And that's why they're all lumped together. It's not that we think they're interchangeable, is we tried to put all of the regs in one place when we originally adopted it. That's what got us here.
Thank you for the clarification on the commercial industrial zones and the lots that exist currently vacant, possible brownfields that we thought could be redeveloped for ground-mounted solar energy type systems. And I do recall that from when we adopted it the first time. So we went and we adopted this on October 20th, 2014. And sure enough, we got somebody as of right erected some type of system I think it was in their side yard in a residential neighborhood, and the complaints came in from the neighbors saying, "What's going on here? This thing doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. How could this possibly be?" And so we went with this moratorium, if that's correct in terms of the legislative history, to like re-examine what other additional standards we needed to adopt as a legislative body to address these concerns. And so this evening, correct me if I'm wrong, we've come up with it's going to be treated as an accessory building, where it can be located with respect to the particular zone. In terms of an R zone or industrial zone, the amount of lot coverage that it could be were there, and I think those are the major highlights, so that we're able to tell people, we encourage you that you can have these if you fit all these criteria.
Correct.
Okay, and that's something that we really, on our first swing at the bat, we didn't really address.
We thought we had addressed
Right,
it, but clearly not aggressively enough.
Right. Okay. So with that said, I think what has been accomplished this evening basically gets at that. With respect to our resident, Mr. Pelletier, who mentioned the parking canopies, I think that's outside of the zone, outside of the requirements of this ordinance with respect to it being on a commercial or industrial or site, correct?
I think he was also talking about at schools, which are typically in residential zones, but it's a special use permit.
Okay, so,
use.
so having the zoning experience that I have, if
Right.
it's going to be in a school-type use, they'd have to request a special use permit, section 17742, they have to make those 3 findings necessary by the zoning board before they could grant the permit.
Correct.
So there's a check, what I'm trying to get at, there's a check along the way in terms of the process, so that there's adequate notice for those types of structures in our community.
And there's a public hearing.
And there's a public hearing, so it's not like just springs on you. So bring me back, round circle, and just conclude here, is with this ordinance, as of right, if you lived in a R40 zone, as of right, as long as you met the height for accessory building and you put it in your rear yard, and you were no greater than, I think, more than 10% of your lot, then by right, you could do this. If you don't meet those criteria, with respect to either the zone or the height, then you would have to seek a variance, which would trigger a public hearing as well, correct?
Depending on the circumstances, you might not even be able to seek a variance.
Okay,
but-
okay.
But
Granted,
yes.
okay. So I guess in the end, what happens is for those things that we have determined here not to be in harmony or in character with the neighborhoods as we currently know them, those who are abutters would have some more protection in terms of notice as to what may appear adjacent to their property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The bottom line. All right, Ms. Kerrigan.
I apologize. So red is on, jeez, I'm sorry, thank you. So we're right now at risk that someone could come and choose to put, as Denise says, in ugly solar, okay. So, but when they.
Or a pretty one. for
Or a
that.
pretty one, exactly. So the town still, it's at their discretion to say that it's perhaps, from the town's perspective, imposing or not in keeping with the character of the town. So we still have we have none. We're totally exposed.
Right now, if somebody came in and submitted an application in a residential zone to put up the kind of array that created the moratorium in the first place, that caused the consternation, we'd have to say, it's approved.
We would.
Yeah,
No way out of it.
no.
We need smarter lawyers.
All right, Mr. Barnes, do you have anything? No?
I do. Following up on that point, so it sounds like we need to pass this because we got to close that opening.
Correct.
Right? But it also sounds like we could make this ordinance better or clearer based upon some of the conversation that we've been having. And is that something that we can, going forward, take a look at if there are issues? This isn't my area of expertise, so I couldn't even tell you what we would need to do. But it sounds like some people have raised some points that should be considered. If we pass this, can we then undertake to receive additional comment and try and tighten this up?
We certainly can. I would tell you, the comments that I've heard tonight, we heard when we did the original ordinance. There's really not anything there that we didn't consider and wrestle with. And there are certainly folks on the Clean Energy Task Force who are very wedded and enamored of solar power to the point where we had conversations saying, you realize not everybody thinks these things are beautiful, right? And as clearly Ms. Hall doesn't. Just that one. And that's what we wrestled with. We actually, when we drafted the first ordinance, we thought we were writing something that was as far as we wanted to push it at the time. And in retrospect, perhaps pushed it a little too far, given what was allowed to happen. And we've now, retrenched a little bit on that. If there are places where we can nibble at the edges, certainly we can look at that. If we've missed something huge, certainly we can look at that.
Okay, so your response is, the issues that have been raised, we've considered them,
Yeah.
You know, and we're comfortable with that. You know, as Mrs. Hall pointed out, the bigger concern is, you know, for the residents. We don't want somebody to have something built next to them that is, you know, unsightly or, you know, detracts from their, their use of their own property. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Any other questions regarding this for this public hearing? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. We have one more. We are opening our community comment section of our public hearing. Roll call, Ms. LeBreau.
Mr. Barnes?
Present.
Ms. Cantor?
Here.
Ms. Casperson? Here. Mr. Davidoff?
Here.
Mr. Dodge?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan? Here. Mr. Winograd? Here. And Mr. Williams?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Communications, we are going to hear, I think, from Mr. Thomas Guzzo regarding zoning regulations concerning number of dogs per household.
How's everybody doing tonight? Everybody a little bit tired from last night?
All right,
I'm right
Miss-
with you. Up until 3, sitting on the nail biter.
Okay, Mr. Guzzo, state your name and
Yep.
address for the record, and you have 5 minutes to
Right.
speak. Thank you.
Sorry about that. We got to break up a little bit of the humor, a little too serious. Tom Guzzo, 28 Price Boulevard, West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm here to talk about the ordinance concerning number of dogs per household. When my fiance and I got engaged, we brought together too many dogs. So we basically broke the ordinance law. So it was frustrating. It really was. So I said, what am I going to do? I sat down with a good friend of ours, close colleague, Joe O'Brien, as we all know. I said, Joe, what do I do? Joe goes, I sat on the council for 10 years. I hated the law. He says, why don't you try to make a change? I said, Joe, that's a lot of work. He says, no, it's not. So what I did was, I'm going to pass this around. And the last letter is from Joey Varengia, a colleague of all ours. Joey did write that letter. He just didn't have a chance to sign it. As we know, Joey's a little bit underneath the weather right now. I did not forge that letter. I will stand behind that. I did some research on my own. And as you know, I talked to many of the members of the council. This law's been on the books, I think, for at least 10 years, at least, if not longer. So what I did is that I basically went around, got on the phone, read ordinance. As you can well see, I don't have to read the numbers. They speak for themselves. What I'm asking the council to do, or what I'm asking the council, let's work together as a team. This is a great town. I've been here all my life. I want to live here. I want to retire here with my beautiful fiancée, Kathy. I'm asking the town, let's work together to change this ordinance. My recommendation would be to go at least up to 3, maybe as many as 4. If you look around at the surrounding towns, the only town that comes even close to where we are is Southington, with 4 dogs per household. And I double-checked these numbers as of today. I called all 12 towns today to make sure we were on the records on it. I just asked the town to reconsider this ordinance and make a change, please. And let's work together as a team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guzzo. All right, that closes the public comment section of the town council of this meeting. And we are, if you want to go ahead, if everybody's ready, we will start to bring the call to order the council meeting. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I feel the need, I'm going to take my prerogative and just speak for a moment about a couple of things. First, I just want to thank Morley School for their delivery of 53 wagons of food today. They delivered to the food pantry, and it was Mrs. Kerrigan and I were there to greet them, along with the town manager and several other people. And it was a very heartwarming and well-needed, I think, display of community on a morning that some of us found extremely difficult and was hard. And I just also wanted to report, and I know that town manager is going to report on this in his section, that we had an incredibly smooth election day, and I just want to give a very, very grateful thank you to our town clerk, Essie LeBreau, our town registrars, Beth Kyle and Beth Sweeney, and our deputy registrars, Gail Crockett and Eileen Swanton. They worked their hearts out, and the many volunteers who helped this be such a smooth election day experience for all. We're all very tired, as Mr. Gozo just said, from this very long and hard campaign, and it is unlike any other. I've heard many people say that they could not sleep last night and do not expect that feeling to go away very quickly. These are unsettled times, and there's a lot of unknowns. And to have a presidential candidate lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College is difficult for over 50% of the voters, and that is something we have to acknowledge. But we are the United States of America, and our system works. We have peaceful transitions of power, and our elected leaders are demonstrating to us what makes this country so special. Secretary Clinton and President Obama called President-elect Trump to congratulate him in the wee hours of the morning. As President Bush aided in the peaceful transition to a president from the opposing party respectfully and completely, so is President Obama working with President-elect Trump. Mr. Trump's acceptance speech was respectful and promising, saying we need to come together and unify our country. Secretary Clinton's gracious and grateful concession speech said we count our blessings to be Americans. We need to respect our differences, and we are better together. As President Obama addressed the country today, democracy is messy, and to have a vibrant democracy, we have to move forward with a presumption of good faith. This is a relay race, he said, and now the next president gets to carry the baton. I want to congratulate our Senator Blumenthal and Congressman Larson, Senator Bai, and Representative Fleischman, Varengia, and Slapp. And thank you to all the candidates for putting their name on the ballot and for volunteering your talents and energy to serve our state of Connecticut, especially my colleague, Mr. Barnes. I am so proud to live in a community that is strong, resilient, and respects every one of its citizens. I have lived my whole life here and have a lot of faith in our community that we can look forward, be engaged, and work with all of our elected officials to make our community, our state, our nation, and our world a better place. And I just want to do one quick quote from Teddy Roosevelt. Doris Kearns Goodwin is one of my favorite historians, and she mentioned the fact that we're at a time similar to when Teddy Roosevelt took office after the Industrial Revolution, where lots of change was happening. And this quote really stuck with me, and I hope it sticks with you, and we will get right on with the council meeting. We must show, not merely in great crisis, but in everyday affairs of life, the qualities of practical intelligence, of courage, of hardihood and endurance, and above all, the power of devotion to a lofty ideal, which made great the men who founded this republic in the days of Washington, which made great the men who preserved this republic in the days of Abraham Lincoln. So God bless our country and our town. And we are going to move on. Yes, you may, Mrs. Hall.
Thank you. I want to thank you for saying that, Mayor Cantor. I think that really sums up what goes on in West Hartford. And I kind of just want to follow up with yesterday, a number of us were all poll standing over at Braeburn School, and we had people from all sides, and we were together throughout the day. We get to know each other as people. But more importantly, we had two brothers, two young boys, who were there supporting their candidate. One, I think, was a freshman in high school, and one was in second or third grade. And the older brother was explaining to the younger boy, what we were voting for, who was voting, who was running for what office. So the younger one said, "Oh, so are these two enemies?" And the older brother said, "No, silly, we're all Americans." And that just really touched me, that was the message of the evening, and today and going forward, we're all Americans.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Going back to the council meeting. Roll call, Ms. LeBreau?
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Ms. Cantor.
Here.
Ms. Casperson.
Here.
Mr. Davidoff.
Here.
Mr. Dodge.
Here.
Ms. Hall.
Here.
Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Winograd. And Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Number 4, Mr. Davidoff.
I move we approve the minutes of the town council meeting of 10/25/2016, as well as the minutes of the public hearing ordinance establishing procedures for licensing and public safety police 10/25/2016.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 5, do we have anyone signed up? While I'm getting the sign-up sheet, which is crossed out. If anybody would like to speak to something on the agenda of this council meeting, but not subject to a public hearing, you can speak. Okay. Number 6, Mr. Davidoff.
I move that we place items 11, 14, 19 through 21 on the consent calendar.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. And number 7, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt the ordinance establishing revised standards for ground-mounted solar energy systems.
Motion's been made and seconded. This was the subject of a public hearing prior to this council meeting. Mr. Allaire, could you briefly describe what we are voting on?
Sure. You already have in place an ordinance permitting, amongst other alternative energy equipment, ground-mounted solar energy arrays. This ordinance imposes additional restrictions on those as a result of a particular incident where somebody installed something that met the requirements of our existing ordinance, but was less than satisfactory to their neighbors. So we have put together some additional restrictions regarding the zones in which they're permitted, the height, setback, that sort of thing, to address those concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Allaire. Yeah, okay, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let me just say, I was actually a little reluctant when we passed the moratorium. I saw the ugly thing, and I certainly was impacted the way a lot of people were by seeing that. But I was reluctant because of the importance to the planet of encouraging use of solar. It is one of the methods that we need to adopt more and more to prevent the climate change that is happening. So any move on our part to limit that or slow down that was disturbing to me. But we certainly, again, needed to do something to fill that loophole. But it does bother me that we've had a moratorium, and even sort of the idea of extending it, which a few minutes ago I thought was actually maybe a good idea, given the very interesting comments made on public session. I don't want to extend it because I want to, in fact, allow proper ones to proceed if that's achievable. I do believe that this ordinance addresses the concerns that we had, does make it possible to continue to promote solar energy in town. I am thrilled to hear about the organization. I was not aware of it. And I'm certainly hopeful that if there are improvements that can be made in the ordinance once passed, of course, we will consider it, and we'd love to hear your input. So I think it's important for us to end the moratorium, get this passed as is, and move it along so that we can, not have the uncertainty of a moratorium, move it forward, and then certainly continue to consider any changes that would meet that balance of encouraging solar while protecting our neighborhoods. So I will be voting yes on this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Any other comments? Mr. Barnes?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. While I agree that solar is an important renewable energy, I think we have to be careful not to, approve things at the expense of, residents' quiet enjoyment of their property. So there is a balance, there that, we have to respect, the residents in the community to protect them against something. Excuse me, I'm not getting emotional, but to protect them against something like, what we have over, with in the Norfelt area. And so I too support, the changes, and we had conversation during the public forum about, what the purpose and the goals were of making those changes. And it also sounds like, there may be ways to make it even better. And if there are people in the community, after looking at it or having studied it, have suggestions, I encourage them to bring them forward to make the ordinance, the best it could be. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Any other comments? Mrs. Casperson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to say clean energy and saving money makes me weepy with excitement. So I am definitely in support of that, but really do understand and appreciate that this is something that we can mold and grow and change as the needs of the community do, and that we will find ways to make it work well for those who would be able to do that and those who want to have that quiet retreat in their homes. So with that, I will be supporting that this evening and look forward to, if we have any changes, that we will then come together and make those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Casperson. Any other comments? I would like to thank the Clean Energy Task Force for their work on the overall ordinance when we and the commitment that they've made for years to improving our the quality of life and the quality of our air in our area, as well as the country and the world. Mr. Pelletier raised some great points, and solar canopies is something I think we should look into. Mr. Mello, thank you also for your service. And Mr. Chase brought some wonderful ideas and comments, and that roof is pretty amazing. I think the one that doesn't look like solar panels. So I think there are things that are, again, are sort of outside this direct fix that we're doing now for this particular this particular change, the three primary things that we were addressing. But I do think location, the size on the yard, and the height. But I also think that maybe it's not perfect, and technology changes, and we're going to have to readdress things periodically. And I'm sure we will be working with the Clean Energy Task Force to perfect this ordinance as we move down the road. So I will support this ordinance. And if that's all, we can do a roll call vote. Ms. LeBreau?
You're ready.
I'm
Okay.
ready. Bring it. Let's
Mr.
go.
Barnes.
Yes.
Ms. Cantor.
Yes.
Ms. Casperson.
Yes.
Mr. Davidoff.
Yes.
Mr. Dodge.
Yes.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Ms. Kerrigan. Yes. Mr. Winograd.
Yes.
And Mr. Williams.
Yes.
It's approved.
Thank you, Ms. LeBreau. Number 8, Mr. Davidoff. Actually, we are going to move the number 8, and then we have the suspension.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt a resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a public highway easement.
Motion's been made a second. And we actually have to suspend the rules for the, I make a motion to suspend the rules to receive communication from TPZ dated November 8, 2016, recommending approval for the resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a public highway easement.
Second.
That motion's been made and seconded. All those or any comments? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Oh, maybe we should explain what it is before we. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Van Winkle.
Yep. Well, I'm going to ask Mr. McGovern to come up and describe the easement. There's not too much magic in this easement, but we're also doing a lot of work in the New Park area with transit-oriented development, so I'll let him talk about this.
So I think, point of order, I think we made a motion to suspend the rules, we second it, we just will finish that vote, and then you will talk to this, that's okay? All those in favor, I think we did aye. All those opposed, so motion carries, I don't think I just finished that, so, and, yeah, okay? Okay, and now we can talk about, thank you.
Good evening, Mark McGovern, Community Services Director. The easement would be provided by Troutbrook Realty Advisors to the town. Troutbrook Realty Advisors is the development affiliate of the West Hartford Housing Authority, which has a project proposal and a site plan approval at 616 New Park Avenue. As part of that approved site plan, the sidewalk in front of the building would extend about 5 feet outside of our public right-of-way. And so this easement would be received by the town and would be just like any other public sidewalk. We would be responsible for future long-term maintenance and repair of the sidewalk like any other, and as an owner of an adjacent public sidewalk, the ownership would need to take care of the ice and snow and the general maintenance related to it. So we're looking forward to this project getting going and moving forward with New Park Avenue initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Any questions for Mr. McGovern, or? No? Okay, thank you so much. So all those in favor? Any other questions, no? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 9, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt the resolution concerning recruitment.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Van Winkle, would you just like to?
This is an appropriation out of revenues for $35,000 for us to hire a firm to assist us with the recruitment and national recruitment of a new town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Van Winkle. We will be talking much more about this, but this allows us to, if we do decide to go ahead with the national search, that we appropriate the money for that. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 10, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the adoption of a resolution to appropriate capital non-recurring expenditure fund balance in the amount of $100,000 to fund the economic development capital project.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Van Winkle, do you want to just?
I'm going to call Mr. McGovern back up so
Okay.
he can explain this.
Mark McGovern, Community Services Director. This is a resolution that would appropriate $100,000 for 2 different needs we have. $85,000 for continued site assessment work at the UConn West Hartford campus. The funding would be used towards our continuing efforts during our due diligence, as well as some other fees related to legal services, consulting services during this due diligence period. And then $15,000 is also noted for retention of planning services, for assistance with our working group that starts up tomorrow evening, working with residents and property owners related to the center density issues that the council's been looking at for some time now. So in particular, the planning assistance is needed for holding some public forums based on the interest in the issue. We're expecting a fair number of people to turn out, and we would need some help facilitating a bigger, larger public discussion on the topic.
And there are a number of sessions that you're going to be holding for this over a 2-month period of time, correct?
Correct. We currently have 2 working group sessions scheduled for November. We are receiving this week proposals from these planning firms. We'll select a firm and then schedule the first public forum, which we're aiming for mid-December. We anticipate another couple of working sessions and 1 more public forum after the turn of the calendar.
And if the full amount is not, of the appropriated money is not spent, it will come back to the council, correct?
It would remain in the same count available for
Right,
other
other
needs.
appropriation,
We're
yes.
hoping not to spend the $15,000.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. And 11 is on consent. 12, number 12, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move we adopt a resolution authorizing the town manager to obtain easements from the state of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for the town of West Hartford.
We got a substitute easement.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let's start over. I move we adopt the substitute resolution authorizing the town manager to obtain easements from the state of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for the town of West Hartford.
We're being corrected.
you need to refer this to TPNC.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll
But
start
we
all
haven't
over.
adopted yet. Oh, it moved, yeah.
Okay, I move the substitute resolution be referred to the TPZ, which authorizes the town manager to obtain easements from the State of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection for the town of West Hartford Park Road / I-84 improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 13 is also referred to TPNC. Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move a resolution to refer to the TPZ. This resolution authorizing the town manager to execute a lease of certain land at Sedgwick Road.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 14 is consent. Reports from the town manager, Mr. Van Winkle.
Okay, the first thing, I want to ask Peter Privatera to come up. Peter was at a 5:30 meeting at the MDC tonight, their finance committee. Peter, myself, and the mayor have been at several meetings with the MDC. It was only 2 weeks ago, Monday, that we heard from the MDC that they were going to seek an 83% increase in our payment to them. Since that time, we've been quite upset with that approach. And so I'm going to let Peter explain what's going on and some of the changes that are happening and maybe tell us what happened tonight.
Sure. Good evening. Pete Privatera, Chief Financial Officer for the town. At 5:30 this evening, I went to the Board of Finance meeting at the MDC where the budget was presented. As you know, one of the concerns that we have is that the MDC is imposing a reserve on all member towns in case the City of Hartford defaults on its payments. And one of the models that the MDC, actually the model that the MDC was proposing is a reserve model where we would budget the full amount with the reserve, which in our case would be a little over $3 million, and we would get a credit back when Hartford made its payments. Before going to the meeting this afternoon, I was reviewing the model, and I stopped by to talk to the town manager because I noticed that the MDC is on a calendar year, we're on a fiscal year. And because we're on a fiscal year, we're basically looking at 2 years. We're looking at 17 and 18. Their reserve model did not take into consideration the fact that we were making 2 payments in 18 based on a tax that included a reserve, which meant for the town of West Hartford, we would have had to have come up with $1.7 million more than they actually needed. So while the presentation was going on, I asked the Chief Executive Officer, Scott Jellison, and the Chief Financial Officer to step outside. And I said, I think we have a problem here because if you issue an ad valorem tax to the town with the full reserve, we are obligated to pay that tax like any other tax warrant, and that would require us to budget for another $1.7 million. So I said, we need to find a legal way to get around this so we won't have to do that. And we met with a few of their attorneys out in the hallway, and I think they've come up with a way to redraft that resolution, that ad valorem tax resolution that basically says that we're liable for the reserve on 17, but not for the reserve on 18. And I'm certainly going to ask Pat O'Leary to review that before it goes anywhere. But, we're still looking at a significant increase, and we're still exploring ways to address that. I mean, the assumption is that Hartford's going to make some of its payments, position ourselves to be ready in case Hartford defaults on 1 or 2 of those payments. How are we going to react to it? And we've been exploring ways with the town manager and the mayors and the finance directors and the town managers from the other towns to come up with a way to do it without imposing a direct tax on the residents.
And Mr. Privatera, could you just explain how the flow of money would work and the payments and when, and also some of the feedback we've received from Hartford too as well?
Sure. There's 4 payments. There's quarterly payments. since the MDC will adopt its budget in December, it'll issue a tax warrant in December, January, April, July, October, October, and then back in April. So there's 4 quarterly payments. What the MDC is proposing is that we budget our normal increase, which is about $618,000, but on top of that, we budget our share proportionally of if Hartford defaulted on all payments, what it would be. So if we budget the full amount, they will rebate us a portion of that on a quarterly basis. But the problem we run into is that their rebate is based on one calendar year of 17. So we wouldn't, we'd only get two payments back. We would have to address our over budgeting issues in the 2 payments we have in calendar year 18. Other towns have approached it differently. Some towns have, nobody likes this. Everyone is concerned about it. Some towns are basically saying, well, if Hartford doesn't make a payment, we will appropriate money out of their reserve fund. And I think I made it pretty clear at the last meeting, we're not going to do that. Worst case scenario is if we had to do something, my recommendation to the town manager and the mayor is that, we go out and get a short-term note and hold that in reserve until something happens with the city of Hartford. And my expectation is that during this upcoming legislative session, that'll be addressed and there will be some resolution. We're still working on it. I know we have another meeting coming up, and trying to, one of the options we explored is to ask the MDC if they can go back and look at their charter and see if there's any way that they can change it around so they can use their reserves, or they can issue tax anticipation notes for a longer period of time. Their position is that their bond counsel, their bankruptcy counsel, they retained one. Their position was that if we don't ask for this reserve up front, then we lose our position should Hartford go bankrupt to go back and collect it. So the remaining towns are still looking at that, and there was discussion amongst the towns about possibly getting our own opinion on it. So that's where we are, but unfortunately, MDC is going to adopt the budget next month, so we're working on it right now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Van Winkle.
I would just say that our CFO, Mr. Privatera, and myself have spent a lot of time looking at other people's numbers. We have enough trouble wrestling with our own budgets in West Hartford and making sure we know that we are spending our dollars effectively. We have spent a lot of time with Corporation Counsel looking at the charter of the Metropolitan District Commission. We've spent time looking at the finances of the city of Hartford. We've met with the city of Hartford multiple times, as recently with the mayor of the city of Hartford. Our mayor, Peter, and I, and other town managers and mayors met in Hartford City Hall to walk through how they got there and what possible solutions, and there doesn't appear to be a solution, solutions they might have to deal with this. The mayor of the city of Hartford said that he'll be able to make the January 2017 payment. They will be able to make the April 2017 payment, but there is some question as to their ability to meet the cash flow of the city toward the end of June. On July 1st, they collect taxes and will have cash then flowing in again. So it's not clear at all that the city's going to default on these payments. And so one of our problems is MDC is saying, well, let's set up a reserve in the event that something might happen that we're not certain will happen, which unfortunately they adopt a budget in December and issue a tax warrant to us. We are required to pay it. Regardless of whether the city pays or doesn't pay, we're still required to pay it. And so we're trying to find a way in which we can make that flexible to some degree. We have spent a lot of time looking at the city's finances. And in fact, in meeting with the mayor of the city of Hartford, he said he would be interested in coming to West Hartford to have a community discussion of how the city is struggling and what caused this problem. I mean, he's upfront about why they have this mess. And the city of Hartford did a number of things which I would be fired for doing in West Hartford. Peter would go with me.
I wouldn't do them. No.
Yeah, he wouldn't have let me do it. So, you know, he's up front with that. They do have serious problems, and they did some stupid things to get themselves into this place. A lot of people have said, let them go bankrupt. And so we need to understand what that means, what it means to the region for our capital city to go bankrupt, what it means to the town and how we're seen as we issue bonds and our ratings if they go bankrupt, and what that bankruptcy might mean and what payments we might have to make if bankruptcy drags on for a while. And it usually does. So there's a whole number of issues here that we need to understand. I gave the mayor some dates in early December. Haven't heard back yet, but if he is willing to come, I'm going to ask him to come to West Hartford to have a public forum to talk about where the city is, what their choices are, and why they are asking for what is an unusual and extraordinary thing. They're asking for the state of Connecticut to provide additional funds to the city. And there's lots of good arguments behind all of this, and there's lots of really sad stories behind all of this, but at least we're working hard to figure out what's going on in the city, the probability of them having an impact on us, how that impacts the MDC, and how the MDC can mitigate that without hurting us. This is going to be a really hard year. Probably the hardest year in my career with the town of West Hartford. The MDC is coming after us. The city of Hartford is talking about serious financial problems. The state of Connecticut, as we know, has serious deficits. This is going to be an interesting year as we begin to do our budgets and try to figure out. So I'm pleased I have an expert like Peter Privatera to help me work through all these issues. But I just would say that to the community and to you that we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that we fully understand, to the degree he's going to MDC saying you didn't do the numbers right. Okay, what a great town we have. What a great staff we have that we sit and kind of look at those numbers. No one else is doing this. I'm delighted to be town manager of a staff that's so qualified, but I look for what is going to be a very complex and difficult year, hard to explain to our residents, and hard for us to figure out how to mitigate the impacts of all these things. So we'd be happy to take questions if you had questions about the MD.
Thank you, Mr. Van Winkle. I think the important thing is to communicate to our residents the challenges and be open with them on what we're facing and what the alternatives are. MDC has come up with some potential legislative actions. The city of Hartford has some ideas on how a long-term bankruptcy fixes past mistakes and challenges, but doesn't fix what's going forward. And there's a big price to pay potentially for that. And so the mayor will talk about some of the potential 51% of their grand list is not taxable. They have a grand list less than the size of Glastonbury and far less than the size of West Hartford. And and they have a very needy population, as well as many other expenses that they have to meet. And so anyway, it's complicated, and there's a lot more we have to educate our residents about. So we've talked, yes. Sorry, Mrs. Hall.
In terms of solutions, I think I had heard that there are over 600 churches in Hartford that have tax exempt status. Is that have you had any discussions about what they go through to get a tax exempt status, and how vigorous the review of whether those, it just seems like a lot of churches.
Are we talking Hartford or MDC now?
Hartford.
That was supposed to be
Yes.
No, I don't. I haven't had, contact with the assessor or tax collector in Hartford, and obviously our interaction has been limited to a review of documents and conversations with folks that I know who were involved with Hartford over the past few years. But I really don't know. I do know that they're in dire straits and they don't have a lot of options. I know that they've been so often when you get to that point, there's really nothing.
I would just emphasize what the mayor said, which was more than 50% of their properties are tax exempt. We received from the state of Connecticut a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes for state-owned property and for hospitals and for colleges in our communities, not for churches. So if they have 600 churches, they have 600 properties that may not be paying taxes. The Metropolitan District Commissions in the city of Hartford, they don't get a pilot for that. They're tax exempt. Their facilities are not taxed by the city of Hartford, not allowed to be taxed by the city of Hartford. So they have some serious, interesting problems, and you got to sit and wonder, well, why do we allow that to happen? And over the last several years, the state has had financial issues, and they have reduced the funding of the pilot money. So although they are supposed to pay a fixed percentage of the actual taxes that would be paid by a property, they have dropped those numbers, and it's now down to about 23% for state property. 23% of the actual tax is now paid by the state of Connecticut. And Hartford, the capital, the office buildings that are legislative and stuff are all now paying substantially less taxes than they were only a few years ago, a payment in lieu of taxes than they were a few years ago. So it's a complex issue that I commiserate with them for their problem, and I'm sad by the fact that they got themselves so deeply into this problem.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Privatera, thank you for your continuing work on this issue. My question really is sort of the confidence in the numbers. So the thing that disturbs me, and we've discussed this at Finance and Budget, is that the MDC appears to be very much behind the 8 ball as far as their vision, their ability to sort of come up with a plan as to Hartford. And even tonight, when you go to the meeting and you talk about the differences between our budget cycle and theirs and the timing of it, it strikes me that if they're coming up with a plan and they're asking us for money to help with their bankruptcy, that they would think about those sorts of issues. And it seems backwards that you have to go there and explain it to them. And it's very disturbing because it shows to me, again with the MDC, that there are some deficiencies. And so, with respect to the money, and let's put aside the bankruptcy, what they're asking us for is in terms of the contingency. So about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, they were saying that our ad valorem tax increase would be about 1.5 million, correct?
Our normal ad
Right,
valorem,
normal.
without a reserve,
Right.
correct.
And then somewhere in between then and now, there was talk of something in the 700s, and then now we're at 618.
618,400, correct.
Right. And so my question is, do you understand, has the information been made to you, available to you, where you understand specifically how they're coming to these numbers? And I mean that with respect to both the ad valorem tax and also the Hartford contingency, because this just seems like they wake up in the morning and they say, oh, 618 today, 2 weeks ago, 750. It just seems to me there isn't a consistent justification for where they are, and I just want to know whether the information is made available to you. We have confidence as to sort of the logic behind them.
The information is made available to us. The initial budget increase was roughly 16%. And I think what happened was that when they were shocked, because obviously I can't see this council passing on a 16% tax increase to residents of Hartford, so we look at it kind of from that perspective. So I think at that point, they heard us and they went back and they sharpened their pencils, and now we're a little over 6%. Their operating expenses, from our perspective, have gone up from 4 to 4.5 to 6, 6.2, 6.3. So next year, they're pretty much where they, on an increased basis, pretty much where they were the year before. But they explained how they were able to reduce their operating budget. They went back and they had a number of positions that they said that now they were not going to fund. All their non-union employees, they pulled back a 2.5% cost of living adjustment that they were going to give. There were a number of adjustments that we made, but we still push back. I mean, they're selling and refinancing $173 million of bonds. You know, so the first question I had to them was, well, what are you going to do with the bond premium? So we do push back a little. But, you know, when they went through their budget tonight, they did explain all of the changes and all of the adjustments that they made to get down to roughly a little over 6%. And, you know, from a finance professional, I can see that, you know, they still had a lot of positions that they just wiped out. And if you hear from them, they'll say, not maybe 3 or 4 years ago, they had 700 positions, now they're down to 500. So I think they understand that the member towns don't like to see those types of increases. But the two big components of the increases were debt service. They issue about $25 million of bonds every year on water and $25 million on sewer, I think. So every year they're going to have, you know, the debt service is going to increase. I think it was 40% of their budget. The other large component of it were fringe benefits. And basically it was an equalization of the fringe benefits between the water side and the sewer side, because in the prior year, most of it was on the water side. Now they're bringing it over to the sewer side. So yes, the first question I asked was, well, can't you amortize that increase over 5 years, smooth it in? So we do push back, but it gets to the point where, you know, they hear what we say, and whether or not they take action on it is up to them. But
Yeah, and my comments aren't at all to suggest that you're not pushing back. I think you're doing a great job, and I appreciate it. It just seems like you're having to do their work and push back, and because it just seems that it's a little audacious to start with the 16% off the bat to us, I think, without going through the due diligence. And so my question was really just to confirm that you feel like you're getting all the information that you need to understand these numbers, and it sounds like at this point you feel like you are. So, and I do thank you very much for your work on this.
I thank you, and I do feel comfortable at this point in time that they give us all the information we ask for. All their financial documents are online. I go and pull them out as I need them and review them. But I think over the past few years we've been pushing back a little harder.
Question.
And again, you know, my responsibility is to.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. Yeah, one follow-up and then one question. So with respect to the debt service and the fringe benefits, which are the largest part of their budget, it sounds like going forward, particularly with them issuing about $170 million worth of bonds, that we can anticipate that these increases, either at 6% or potentially higher, are going to continue into the foreseeable future. Is that right?
I would expect that they would. I know that a good portion of the $173 million of bonds are refunding of bans. So next year they're going to see full principal payment on that. So, and if they do issue $25 million on water and $25 million on sewer every year, I don't know what their retirement schedule is, but I'm assuming that would, you know, maintain that 40 to 45% of their budget on debt service.
Okay, so our current payment to MDC on an annual basis is somewhere around $10 million.
8.9 million this year. Yeah.
This year is 8.9. Next year projected
9.5.
9. Okay. And so as we look out in the 10-year projections with normal or higher increases, we're looking at potentially 15 million, maybe more on an annual ad valorem payment to the MDC.
I mean, on a projection basis, we are projecting a multi-year forecast. I'm assuming we're going to stick to about between 6 to 8% increase a year, unless we see something different. And again, you have fixed cost debt service, you have fixed cost employee benefits, OPEB liabilities. Those don't tend to go away. So I'm assuming that we're probably going to be in the 6 to 8% range moving forward.
Right. I mean, my concern is for our residents that have, fixed incomes, that, to absorb these types of increases just in this one area alone, we're not even talking about the rest of our budget, which went up $11.2 million last year. We're not even talking about those increases. This is just for the MDC, and we're going to be not even asking, we're going to be expecting our residents to absorb those increases, and I'm sure that's going to be very difficult for many people in our community to do that. The second question I had, I've had people come up over the last week or two and basically say, well, the town shouldn't pay money into the reserve. It's outrageous, Hartford, created their mess. And I'm not passing judgment, I'm just telling you what people told me, and they said we shouldn't do it, and if the town or the town council authorizes that, essentially we should all be fired from our high-paying jobs here. So, Mr. Van Winkle, you mentioned that, if we get a tax bill, we have to pay it. And so if you could just briefly, and I know it's a complicated issue, but to say, well, we get a tax bill, you know what, we're not going to pay it, forget it. What does that mean to us as a town and to the folks in our community?
We get a tax bill, it's a liability. We're obligated to pay for it. It goes on our books. If we don't pay for it or we don't address it, it's a disclosable event, which means that when we go to sell bonds, the rating agencies will say, well, wait a minute, you had a bill for $12 million, you only paid $6 million. Why didn't you pay the bill? Would try to argue that we didn't like the methodology behind it or the logic behind it, but the fact of the matter is that we defaulted on that. So that's a little red check mark that goes in the wrong column. One of my primary responsibilities, as I see it as a finance director, is to do whatever I need to do and make whatever suggestions I need to make to you folks to maintain our AAA credit rating. So I would not advise you to ignore that payment at the expense of being put on a credit watch by the rating agencies. I try to explore every other available option, for getting to that point. So I know it's frustrating and people are upset over it. We're upset over it, but it is a legal obligation that we need to address.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Mr. Dodge.
Thank you. I think, like probably everybody else on this council, I feel a mixture of sympathy and outrage for Hartford with the situation that they're in. Mr. Van Winkle put it very well that they're in this position because of a number of stupid decisions that were made by previous administrations. And I credit the current mayor for, I think, doing an admirable job to fix it as best he can. That being said, I just want to touch on the idea of this contingency fee. Thank God municipal bankruptcies don't happen every day. And so I think, this is not something that we or many people have a lot of experience with. Just on a gut level, it doesn't make sense to me, the idea that that the MDC needs to set aside a contingency fee to preserve its place in line in the event that Hartford went bankrupt. And actually, I would just reiterate a point that I made at the last meeting, that Hartford cannot just go bankrupt. They need the permission of the governor in order to do so. They may default on payments, but they're not just going to go bankrupt. And so you had mentioned that we might engage perhaps with other member towns, our own bankruptcy council, to review that opinion, that this is somehow necessary to preserve our place in line in the event that Hartford went bankrupt. And I would just encourage that idea because, again, I won't claim to be any kind of expert in this, but just on a gut level, it doesn't make sense to me. And I think given some of the other inaccuracies, Mr. Barnes and Mr. Williams discussed just the inconsistency in the numbers that you're getting from the MDC. I think it's important to make sure that we are absolutely certain that that truly is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dodge. Yes, Mr. Land.
If I may, I think I can respond to that with the short, this is why we don't need bankruptcy counsel answer. the mayor and Mr. Privateria, and Mr. Van Winkle and I went to the MDC board meeting a week ago, Monday, and their bankruptcy counsel were there. And I raised exactly that same question. I said, I'm not connecting a couple of dots here. Something's not adding up. How does the reserve fund protect or preserve your position in the bankruptcy? And the answer is, well, it doesn't. The answer is, we have a concern about whether, if Hartford went into bankruptcy, this money would get paid. And that is a legitimate bankruptcy question, and there are certainly questions. Given our concern that it may not get paid or may get paid, if at all, over time, how best do we protect the MDC, which needs that money today to operate? And the answer is, well, we get it from everybody else. So it's not really, that's not even a bankruptcy question. That's just the practical, well, I can't steal money from Ron, so I'm going to steal it from you instead. Borrow. That's the answer, and it's not a complicated bankruptcy question.
Thank you, Mr. Allaire. Mrs. Hall?
Thank you. Have we gotten any clarity from the state as to whether the ad valorem tax imposed on us would be exempt from the 2.5% spending cap that the state is imposing on us?
No. My comments to the MDC were, start your discussions with the state. We have to address the 2.5% cap. At minimum, we're going to have to argue the fact that the majority of the cost that we're paying could be related to their debt service. So if it's their debt service, it's still debt service. We should be able to reduce that. But I raise it all the time. I'm cognizant of the fact that that cap is still out there. So I did ask them to include that in the discussions.
Wasn't there a utility exemption too? Wasn't there a utility exemption too that they were trying to get? So there was something.
There were
that
a
they
couple of
trying-
exceptions that we wanted to push for. We wanted to add OPEB, we wanted to add pensions. I mean, we wanted to get rid of the arbitration award issue. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that we would like to do as a town, but it's like it's coming at it from the right on the cap and on the left from the MDC. So we did have that discussion with the MDC to raise that question, and I'm hoping when the time is right, when everyone sits down with state representatives, that we're part of that discussion.
Mr. Yes.
Everybody's trying to be nice. The state wrote a piece of legislation that is inadequate, unclear, perhaps inappropriate. I don't know what other word to throw at it.
Unworkable.
And we have no idea how this applies to us, what it means, what's in, what's out. They didn't really ask us before they adopted this legislation about, how would this work? And so we're somewhat stuck with this. And just to emphasize for the public, the increase that MDC had been talking about would have pushed us into an expenditure. We lose another $2 million from the state of Connecticut. And so not only do we have an increase in spending, we're going to have a loss of revenue because we've broken this 2.5%. It's going to be a really hard year. That's all I got to say. This is going to be.
Okay, Mrs. Hall.
Yeah, sorry. And then just given the movement in rates today, you referenced that part of the one of the pieces in their financial equation was refinancing. Are we going to have to recast based upon?
No, they or us? Them?
Well, they.
No.
I'm just wondering how firm this
No.
new number is, because we had.
It's firm. It's a negotiated deal. They've already have agreed on the rate and everything, so they're locked in. So it's a negotiated. It's not a competitive sale. So they already know what.
Which I would have issue that they do negotiated and not competitive in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, many questions, and we are going to be having follow-up meetings now that the election is over. We'll know who our delegation is, and we've talked about meeting with our commissioners. We've already talked to our commissioners, and so much more to follow in a very quick, tight time frame. Thank you, Mr. Privatera. We really appreciate all the work on this. Yes, Mr. Van Winkle, I think we're still on reports from the town manager.
I just would reiterate what you said earlier, is that we had a really good election yesterday. Running an election is not a simple thing. There are a million rules, a million things that go on. Our IT people were involved in making sure everything was working. Our facilities people were out making sure it was. Our police were part of this process. And although it may not have been perfect, which would be hard to do in every way. When I went to vote, it was a 5-minute experience on a very sizable turnout for an election. And I think most people saw that. If you got to the polls at 6 in the morning, you found long lines. We had lines that went around this building inside for people here who got up at 5 to go vote. So that was about the most delay that we had all day. And although it's a complex thing to run an election, I think our registrars and the team of people that work with our registrars really did a great job for this. Yeah.
Really did. Thank you. Anything
That's all
else?
I have. If there are any other
Anything
questions, Peter
further?
would be glad to answer them.
Yeah, he's gone. He left quickly. Number 16, announcements. I'm going to start first. I didn't thank you, Mr. Allaire, for your work on the ordinance, so I appreciate all the work on it. I know it wasn't simple, so I'm sorry about that. 2016 Festival of Trees. Organizations are invited to create a tree for the 2016 Festival of Trees. It will be on display during the holiday stroll on Thursday, December 1st. This annual event has attracted upwards of 4,000 visitors. To participate, go to whfirstchurch.org/trees and fill out the registration form. The deadline is November 20th. The trees are later auctioned off and proceeds benefit many community organizations. A special Thanksgiving meal for a senior citizen in need. Elmwood Kitchen would love to deliver a delicious complimentary Thanksgiving dinner to a senior citizen in need who may be living alone, homebound, or unable to visit friends or relatives this year. Please encourage the senior to call Elmwood Kitchen at 860-640-0072 by 4 p.m. on Monday, November 21st. They deliver a homemade meal on Thanksgiving morning, including roast turkey, homemade gravy, mashed potatoes, sweet green beans. It sounds delicious, and it is an incredible service that they do, and we want to thank Andre Brell for all of his work on this. This is remarkable. Veterans Day ceremony, Friday, November 11th, 11 a.m. Retired USN Captain Dr. Karen Daly will be the guest speaker for the 2016 Veterans Day ceremony at the Connecticut Veterans Memorial, West Hartford, located at the corner of Farmington Avenue and North Main Street. The ceremony is organized by the American Legion Hayes Village Post 96. The event also features Senator Beth Bayh, me, Town Councilor Denise Hall, Minority Leader Denise Hall, Deacon James Hickey, and the American Legion Commander Mo Fredette. The national anthem will be sung by Outlook from Kingswood Oxford School, and taps will be paid by Peter Rowe. Following the ceremony at 11:30, veterans are invited to a special thank you lunch buffet at the American Legion, Post 96, 45 Raymond Road, compliments of the CT Police Work Dog Association. 4th Annual War Chief Sports Council Tailgate Party, Saturday, November 12th. You're cordially invited to the 4th Annual War Chief Sports Council, 6:30 to 10:30 at West Hartford Town Hall Auditorium, and it benefits both high schools' sports programs. Volunteer fair for students, Thursday, November 17th, 6 to 8 p.m. Attention middle and high school students. Are you in need of volunteer hours? Want to get more involved in your community? If yes, join us on Thursday, November 17th, Conrad High School. Cafeteria 6 to 8. Exploring volunteer opportunities from over 15 local agencies, YMCA, Playhouse Park, Noah Webster House, Relay for Life, and Hannock. There will be a fair to share the information on volunteer opportunities. Okay, trunk show fundraiser Friday, November 18th, 7 to 9. You are invited to join us for wine and cheese reception on Friday, November 18th at the West Hartford Senior Center at Bishop's Corner, featuring jewelry designer Bianca Zoe. All Bianca's jewelry is handmade, sterling silver, natural gemstones. History drives us Sunday, November 20th, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Noel Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society is pleased to offer the second bus tour in History Drives Us series on November 20th from 1 to 2:30. The tour will point out long-forgotten historical sites in town, like Sherman Acres on South Main Street, the Beach Mansion on Vine Hill Farm, on Brighton Lane, the Goodwin Pottery Works on New Britain Avenue, and the Charter Oak Racetrack on New Park Avenue. They will depart from the Webster House and is $30 per person, $25 for museum members, and can be purchased online. Visit the Noel Webster House website. Seating is limited. Any other announcements? Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've left at all my colleagues' desk a little card and a button. It's save the date, November 26, 17 days from now. It's Small Business Saturday. And I think most of you know I'm a small business retailer, and it's a program that's been in existence for several years from American Express, encouraging people to shop small, shop local, particularly on this day, but throughout the entire year. And over the years, this concept has taken off and has been quite successful for a lot of our retailers. And the reason I wanted to bring out and point this out is we may or may not meet the week of Thanksgiving, and it's that Saturday right after Thanksgiving. I ask all my colleagues to wear a button as something that can unite us in cause, because often when we sit on zoning applications around the table here, we hear people say that there doesn't seem to be enough retail here. And the reason that there doesn't seem to be enough retail is people need to get into the shops, into the restaurants, into the businesses that are in their local community, that are on their main streets, that are in their business districts, to show their support. They need that foot traffic to survive, especially in light of the effect that the internet has on our economy, our local economy, as well as their ability or inability to compete with big store, big box retailers. So we all can make a contribution to our local economy. For the third year in a row, I've been named a neighborhood champion in the town of Newington to promote this, and I've been out there talking up this idea. I'm certain here in West Hartford there will be others in our business community taking on this charge. It is so important because in retail, the last quarter of the year can determine whether or not that store will open come January. That's how crucial the dollars that can be poured into these local businesses, the effect that we can have. But we can make the difference. And I constantly will say it truly makes a difference to shop local, shop small. And you'll see a lot more on social media, and I'm certain we'll see it here in WEHA and in West Hartford. But wherever your favorite place to go to patronize this holiday season, you'll make a difference. And on behalf of merchants like myself, think really about small business. It's really the backbone of our community. And thank you for the opportunity to promote that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Anybody else have an announcement? Okay. Number 17, reports from Corporation Counsel.
I do not have a formal report. Regrettably, we do need a brief executive session. I promise it will be brief, but I also promised Attorney Alisi he'd be out of here by 8:15, so my reputation's shot already on that one. But.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allaire. That's appointments. I'd like to move Jessica Schaefer, move to appoint Jessica Schaefer Helmecki to the Conservation Environment Commission for a term ending 12/31/2017, and Nordier Napier appointed to Substance Abuse Prevention Commission for a term ending 8/31/2019.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Number 22, Mr. Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the adoption of the consent calendar.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. No communications, no petitions. I move that we go into executive session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
And just to note for the record, for the purposes of discussing strategy or negotiations with respect to a pending claim.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.